what I want to do and what I will do is you graduate from a college. I think you should get automatically, as part of your diploma, a green card to be able to stay in this country. Somebody graduates at the top of the class, they can't even make a deal with the company because they don't think they're going to be able to stay in the country. That is going to end on day one.
The moment it became impossible to ignore was not marked by a formal announcement or a diplomatic rupture, but by silence. Empty airport terminals, vacant hotel lobbies, idle cargo ships, and booking systems flooded with cancellations instead of reservations. Almost overnight, international travel, trade, and tourism connected to the United States appeared to stall, creating scenes that industry veterans described as unsettling and unprecedented. Flights that once arrived full landed half-empty. Ports that normally ran 24 hours a day slowed to a crawl. For the first time in decades, the United States was not just criticized abroad, it was being actively avoided. What many analysts are calling a sudden global consumer boycott did not emerge from a treaty, a summit, or even a coordinated government decision. Instead, it grew from millions of individual choices made almost simultaneously. Travelers changed destinations. Companies shifted suppliers. Tourists canceled trips. Students deferred study plans. The cumulative effect was swift and severe, catching U.S. businesses and policymakers off guard. Economists note that while sanctions and tariffs usually take months or years to ripple through economies, this shift happened in days, driven not by legislation but by sentiment. At the center of this movement is a phrase that began as a joke and evolved into a rallying cry: "Make America Go Away." What started as a viral meme spread across social platforms, shared initially as satire, soon became shorthand for a broader frustration with U.S. politics, rhetoric, and global posture. According to digital analysts, the phrase rapidly transcended online spaces and became a loose organizing principle for consumer behavior. Unlike traditional boycotts, it did not rely on leaders or organizations. There were no spokespeople, no formal demands. The power came from scale and speed, as individuals around the world independently chose to disengage. Observers say the movement's strength lies in its simplicity. Rather than lobbying governments or staging protests, participants simply opted out. They booked vacations elsewhere, bought non-American brands, and urged employers to reconsider U.S.-based investments. Because these decisions required no permission and no coordination beyond shared sentiment, the impact was immediate. Airlines felt it first, followed closely by hotels, cruise lines, and entertainment venues. In cities once buoyed by international tourism, workers were sent home early as demand evaporated. Underlying this shift is a growing belief that America's global brand has become toxic. For decades, U.S. influence rested not only on military or economic power, but on soft power, culture, ideals, and the promise of opportunity. Critics now argue that this appeal has eroded sharply. They point to polarizing political rhetoric, highly publicized violence, diplomatic confrontations, and moments of international embarrassment that circulate endlessly online. In this environment, the United States is no longer seen as aspirational by many abroad, but as unstable and unpredictable. That perception has had tangible consequences. International labor unions, particularly in Europe and Canada, have reportedly escalated pressure by slowing or halting the handling of U.S.-bound cargo. Dock workers and transport unions, citing safety, solidarity, or protest, have created bottlenecks that disrupt supply chains. These actions, while not universal, are enough to raise alarms among logistics companies and retailers. Even brief slowdowns at major ports can lead to shortages and price spikes inside the United States, amplifying the economic fallout. Behind the scenes, corporate leaders appear to be making quiet but consequential decisions. According to industry insiders, executives at several multinational corporations have agreed informally to reduce exposure to the U.S. market, a strategy often described as de-risking. This includes canceling or postponing factory construction, moving research and development teams abroad, and redirecting investment to regions perceived as more stable. Notably, many of these moves are happening without press releases or public explanations, suggesting a desire to avoid political backlash while protecting long-term profitability. The tourism and consumer sectors have been hit especially hard. Hotels report mass cancellations from Europe and Asia. Airlines have cut routes and reduced frequencies. Theme parks and casinos, heavily reliant on foreign visitors, are bracing for prolonged downturns. Economists warn that millions of U.S. jobs depend directly or indirectly on international tourism, from hospitality workers to suppliers. A sustained decline could ripple through local economies, particularly in states where tourism is a major employer. Amid this turmoil, President Trump is portrayed by critics as increasingly isolated and reactive. Reports describe a White House scrambling to contain the damage through a mix of threats, reassurances, and urgent diplomatic outreach. Yet foreign leaders, according to diplomatic sources, have been slow to respond or unwilling to engage publicly. The usual channels of persuasion appear less effective when the pressure comes not from governments, but from consumers and corporations acting independently. One potential turning point lies with big tech. U.S. technology companies remain deeply embedded in global markets, but they are also vulnerable to regulatory action abroad. The European Union's renewed scrutiny and threats of fines or restrictions have reportedly prompted tech executives to pressure the administration directly. Analysts say these companies fear that prolonged hostility could lead to market fragmentation or even partial digital disengagement, outcomes that would hurt profits and innovation. Whether this corporate pressure will translate into policy shifts remains uncertain. Beyond immediate economic pain, some analysts warn of a deeper systemic risk tied to global finance. The discussion increasingly includes the role of BRICS nations and their long-standing interest in reducing reliance on the U.S. dollar. While abandoning the dollar entirely would be complex and risky, even incremental moves could weaken its dominance. Critics describe this possibility as a financial nuclear option, one that could trigger inflation, higher borrowing costs, and reduced global confidence in U.S. financial leadership. Though such outcomes are not inevitable, the current climate has made previously unthinkable scenarios part of mainstream debate. What distinguishes this moment from past crises is the source of pressure. This is not a coordinated diplomatic isolation or a formal trade war. It is a diffuse, bottom-up response driven by perception and choice. In effect, consumers around the world have exercised a kind of veto power, withdrawing participation from the U.S. economy without waiting for official approval. Some commentators argue that this represents a new era in global politics, where public sentiment can move faster and hit harder than traditional statecraft. As the situation continues to unfold, the broader implications are still coming into focus. Supporters of the administration dismiss the boycott as exaggerated or temporary, pointing to America's economic resilience. Critics counter that reputational damage is harder to repair than balance sheets. Once trust and appeal are lost, rebuilding them can take years, if not generations. The question now facing the United States is whether it can adapt to a world where influence depends as much on perception as on power. In the eyes of many observers, this moment marks a historic shift. The United States has not been formally removed from any institution or alliance, yet it finds itself sidelined by collective consumer behavior. Whether this isolation deepens or recedes will depend on choices made in the coming months, both by leaders and by the public. What is clear is that the global landscape has changed, and the consequences of that change are being felt in real time across industries, borders, and communities. If you want to stay informed as this story develops, hit the subscribe button for more future uploads.